Today, we are examining one of the most manipulated debates in tech policy: how the false choice between protecting children online and preserving LGBTQ plus expression and community has become one of big tech's most effective shields against accountability. The Kids Online Safety Act passed the Senate 91 to 3, yet remains stalled amid opposition, including claims that legislation would be harmful to queer youth, despite the fact that these kids are 3 times more likely to experience unsafe online interactions. Joining me today is Lennon Torres, whose journey from child performer to safety advocate gives her unparalleled insight into this issue. As a young person who gained national recognition on shows like Dance Moms, Lennon built a following of hundreds of thousands on social media. And unfortunately, with that visibility came death threats about her queer identity and targeting by predatory adults and predatory product features. But Lennon has transformed those traumatic experiences into powerful advocacy. She is a key leader of campaigns and programs at the HEAT Initiative, which is a nonprofit pushing the tech industry to create safer products for children. Some fun facts: she's collaborated with major brands like Nike, Marc Jacobs, and Bose, which gave her an insider's view of social media marketing and big tech. She also told me that she once did a billboard for Oculus, which is where I used to work, which is an extra funny and satisfying invisible string moment. And epically, Lennon co authored a piece in The Atlantic with Jonathan Haidt and Zachary Rausch about how tech companies use LGBTQ plus concerns as a shield against regulation. Beyond her advocacy work, Lennon writes The Diary of a Palatable Trans Woman on Substack. I highly recommend you subscribe if you haven't already. It's her unflinching examination of what it costs to be effective in spaces that would prefer your edges sanded down. She explores the tension between palatability and authenticity, between being invited to the room and being allowed to be whole once you're there. Lennon, thank you so much for joining me today.
Kelly, I'm so excited and I wish I could bring you everywhere to just introduce me like that. I feel like $1 million right now. That was incredible. Thank you.
You are welcome. It is my honor. And I was reflecting this morning on the first time I ever met you, which was registering for an advocacy event in DC. And you were in the, kind of to the side of where we were lined up, and we're talking about how you needed to get an earlier flight home because you missed your dog. And I was like, I need to be friends with this person.
I love that. It's so funny. I still feel that way and every trip I'm on, I'm always checking how fast can I get back to my dog.
I love it. So, before we dive into the policy debate, I was hoping you could share just a little bit about yourself and your story, because as we just said, you grew up in the public eye as a young dancer, but when you got your first iPhone at 13 and joined social media, things changed. And so, I'm wondering how that early exposure shapes your perspective on these issues, both as someone who found community and business success online, and as someone who's experienced serious harms.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Kelly. I thought of a lot about how I wanted to, answer this question. I'm always asked, what's your story or, where do you come from? And to me, I think that my lived experiences and my survivorship is, really a part of a systemic problem. And I actually didn't realize that for most of the time it was happening to me. I started dancing professionally at the age of 13. I was traveling, I was gaining an audience. A lot of people had access to me and some of my most intimate thoughts as a developing young person. And as many adults know, that can be incredibly dangerous. And that was my experience, unfortunately. But the interesting reflection I have is that at those times, I really just felt a lot of shame and guilt and honestly curiosity because I always felt like I wasn't in control and it drove me crazy, but I couldn't articulate why I felt out of control when seemingly all of my behaviors were my choice.
Mm,
And that was something I had to grapple with, and I'm very grateful for the leadership at Heat Initiative and the other incredible advocates like yourself in this field who have dedicated their lives to explaining and sharing and educating folks on the systemic problems that we're facing. And
mhm,
so what I thought as a young person was an isolated, experience that made me feel gross and, at moments unloved were actually a part of a bigger game that I didn't even have the dice to. And
mm.
that really sucked, to be honest. It was terrible.
Yeah. Well, I mean, in your Atlantic piece, you write about how you received death threats, as part of that experience, and I also, have read your writing about how online community offered support at that time. And kind of before we get into some of the more nuts and bolts of the policy, I'm wondering how you reconcile those dual realities when you think about online safety legislation.
I think the answer is actually really simple as I'm honest with myself. I'm
Mhm,
not gonna sit here and say that all social media, all technology is bad and has no benefits because that's not the truth. As
mhm,
much as I would love to be an absolutist and live in a world that was black and white, we are all enveloped in gray, and that takes effort, it takes honesty, and it takes accountability, and for me, I can hold that. I don't have a problem holding both. I think that there is an incredible opportunity for technology to intervene in some of the most dangerous and harmful communities and experiences to help. But there's
mhm,
also a way that it could be used to multiply the harm at an exponential scale.
mm,
And because of that, you have to say both are true and you have to accept that. And you need to move forward in a way that allows both of those dichotomies to actually prove to not be dichotomies and to be very true that our online communities are a reflection of our in person communities. And we have a lot of work to do because kids and vulnerable communities of all ages deserve safe spaces online and in person, and we're just nowhere near on either fronts.
I love that answer. I totally agree with it. I am, consider myself a technologist at my core, even though as you said, dedicating everything to fight big tech. Because yeah, you're right. Like we're here because of technology right now, and there's a lot of opportunities for tech to scale help and support. And when I in the intro, I had cited that statistic that LGBTQ plus youth are 3 times more likely to experience harms online. You just talked about some of the kind of unsafe environments. For those who might be less familiar, could you walk us through what unsafe interactions might look like?
Yeah, totally. And I'll say first, like light activation warning, sensitive subject area for any of my folks watching. I'm going to discuss, online grooming, child sexual abuse, as well as some other harmful topics. So just throwing that out there, but take care
Thank
of
you.
yourself while listening. I think when you think about it, it's kids are curious. They look for ways to learn, to understand their surroundings, to integrate themselves into their surroundings. It's human nature to to do that. And
Mhm,
when you're a kid and you have all these tools to do that, you can find yourself in some interesting situations, especially if your in-person environment is not allowing you to express yourself in a way that you really want to. I, growing up, was incredibly lucky to be supported as a young LGBTQ plus person. I didn't come out until I was a freshman in high school, but I actually think that's pretty young. And I at that time would, need to go to online, places because there wasn't a ton of, queer culture, LGBTQ plus rich environments in Arizona at the time, which is where I grew up. And So I went online to, answer my questions about what it was like to date as a queer person, or what is it like to, be an adult as a queer person. We don't have many examples, and especially didn't have a ton of examples back then, especially of trans women. And as a trans person, I think that, impacts you because you want to see people that look and feel like you.
Mhm.
And the unfortunate part of that is you often will come across people who will make you feel like $1,000,000, whether that's strangers DMing me on Instagram. That was probably the most common way I met strangers as a young person, was on Instagram and Snapchat. And I would talk, they'd reach out and it would be a very nice message. And even at some points when my account would like filter messages and I would, accept them and stuff, I would still accept them because a lot of the time it started out really nice. It sounded awesome. I was excited to talk to these people. Oh, this person says to be, a young person, maybe a little bit older than me, maybe a lot older than me, but that, seems harmless. I was a kid. I didn't have all of my, my frontal, whatever they say. I don't
Yeah,
want to screw it up.
exactly,
All
exactly.
the doctors are gonna laugh at me, but like I just wasn't. I didn't have that wherewithal to, decide what was safe and what wasn't. And grooming tactics are highly calculated, and so I would, essentially be groomed online, to move off platforming is what, we call it in the space, where you move from one platform to another to increase access and limit security. And so
Mhm.
that was, then I would move to these gay chat sites. I remember one of them was like, actually, I don't wanna say it because in case it is a thing out there, I don't want a young person to find it. But it's like, there are these chat rooms that you would go, and I remember the first time I entered one, and this was because these people were telling me I could go here and I would feel seen. All these people are like me. And so I remember the first time I was about 13, maybe 14, and, the box came up and it just said, "Check if you are 18 and up." And I was like, "Well, I'm 14, but oop." And right in I was, and it was essentially an Omegle feature where, like, you would just switch out chats, and a lot of the time, most of the time, all the time, were really inappropriate experiences with adults I had never met before. And, I it's hard to talk about this stuff, but I really think it's important because I felt so ashamed. And if any queer people out there get their hands on this, like, know that you are loved and you're beautiful and this is not your fault. So,
Mhm.
and in those rooms, these groomers, it's they know how to talk to you. They know how to ask you for things. They know, and then before you know it, it's like, my top is off, or
Mhm.
I'm showing more of my face than I was comfortable with. Oh, there goes my pants. And it can get progressively worse to the point where you're performing sexual acts on camera for complete strangers before you even really know what's going on. And that
Mhm.
was my experience. And so when I hear people talking about, you know, any online safety, any regulation, any, improvement on the social media and online ecosystem front will harm access and harm queer people specifically, I don't dismiss it. I just say, let's ask another question. Like, let's keep asking questions. And so my question is, who benefits from nothing changing? Big
Mhm.
tech. Who doesn't benefit from changes? Big tech. And so you have to remind yourself, I often say follow the money, but that's really something that I push back on because queer people are isolated. We're at an unprecedented time of hate for queer people right now in this country. And it's really important that we have safe spaces, and I don't blame anyone for going online to try to find them, but what happens right now is it looks more like a piranha-filled, like, pool versus, like, a nice snorkel in Hawaii, you know?
Mhm.
Like, you're
Mhm.
not gonna go and find you might find one awesome person online, which is odd great, but then that's one for, like, 50 others. And the reason I get so passionate, and then I will pause because I talk all the time. My real passion is that, like, why would we be fighting for the status quo to maintain on these platforms when we have credible research that says LGBTQ plus young people are 3 times more likely, and it doesn't take a rocket scientist to know why. It's because we don't have it in our everyday lives. So as much as I'd wanna fix everything at once, we can't, and so that's why I really advocate for stronger protections online so that we can continue to build online communities that can eventually support and encourage and cradle the LGBTQ plus community.
Thank you. I mean, that is so important, and I'm really grateful for your perspective, in large part because every time I publish a Substack that talks about passing KOSA, for instance, I get emails from young LGBTQ plus people who are asking, "Why are you standing for something that will harm me?" And I love your advice to follow the money because it's horrifying what I've learned about how tech is essentially pouring millions and millions of dollars into convincing groups that are already vulnerable that laws that would drive some accountability are harmful to them. And at the same time, I get it, right? We have, there's this fear that KOSA, or similar regulation would create the internet don't say gay, right? Kind of world where we are censoring content based on political agendas. And I know that, Senator Blackburn, who has been a huge advocate for KOSA for kids, but in 2022, she made a comment in a YouTube video that's gone viral about protecting kids from the transgender. And, you know, we'll talk in a minute about some changes that have been made to the bill since then, but like these comments really don't help. And last summer at that event that we met at, many of us were attending this FTC workshop on the attention economy, addressing social media harms. And turns out the next week, the FTC was running a workshop on the dangers of gender affirming care for minors. So it's not, like you said, it's not a black and white issue, and it's totally reasonable that there are concerns. And uh, big tech is paying social media influencers, you've written about this, to push back against KOSA, kind of, on the grounds of concern for LGBTQ plus kids. And so I'm wondering, you know,
I would love to jump in on something you
yeah,
said,
yeah,
and
jump in.
just because I totally I'm loving that you brought up the first time we met because what an interesting moment in my personal, like, career and just person I mean, career, they're all one and the same for me, whether that's good or bad, and that was a really tough week for me because I was really looking forward to traveling to DC and fighting for all kids to be safe online, and hearing that the FTC, which is traditionally a nonpartisan accountability measure for companies in the US, was incredibly partisan and
Mhm,
was leaning into this te terrible narrative and just this it was really ugly, and all I could think was, "What a slap in the face," because I show up every day to advocate for all children, and I sit across the table from, Blackburn staff, and I go to her office. I shook her hand at an event last June, and I respect the work that she's done to protect kids online, and it may be hard for, you know, some folks to hear that, and trust me, I feel you because she's not traditionally an LGBTQ plus ally. And for that, I won't, sit down and have dinner with her.
mhm.
But I will show up to the meeting that is supposed to be about protecting all kids online so that when the bill gets to the floor, for example, the Senate version of KOSA, there had been adjustments made that even Blackburn was okay with because she compromised. I mean, I don't know all the back workings of what was going on in her head, but from what it looked like, she was willing to let go of some really, in my opinion, outdated and bigoted point of views to allow the bill to move forward because she realized that a design bill would help all kids. And therefore, it was in everyone's best interest to pass it because we all want to protect kids.
Hmm.
And that discipline is not something I would ask of everyone. It's something I ask of myself, though, because I feel like I have the privilege to be in those rooms. But it's hard, and I wrote about this, about true bipartisanship being what can save the kids of our time with this issue with big tech's pervasiveness and dangerous practices, that we really can see a better future. And I wrote with LMG about that. And it was tough to write, to be honest, because LMG, sorry, I'm Laura Marquez Garrett, an attorney. I should probably say who that is. They use they them pronouns. They are non-binary. They are my hero, along with you, Kelly. And I don't even just say that. I have so much respect for you and the work you do. But LMG, Laura Marquez Garrett, and I wrote about, what it means for us as people living in a queer body with a queer identity to show up to these rooms that, we wouldn't normally be in, and talking to people that we wouldn't normally want to talk to be quite frank with you. I'm not dying to go knock on Marsha Blackburn's door. Like, I'm just not. And that's okay, but I'll still go to the meeting and I'll still do the work because that's what matters, and I have the capacity and the safety to do so.
Yeah, well, thank you for sharing that, and I definitely learned a lot from talking to you at that event on that topic and figuring out how to kind of thread the needle myself of, I had just before finding out about the next week's workshop, taken a cheesy picture with the FTC commissioner, which, I was prepared to share far and wide. And it's like, you know what, I'll be an FTC whistleblower, but I don't think I'm going to be really excited about this relationship more broadly because I disagree with some of the other things that this person and his organization are doing. And I really love how you kind of just made that differentiation between content and design because the original version of KOSA, back when Senator Blackburn made the comments we just referenced, it did have content clauses, right, which would have been harmful to many young people at several different margins, especially LGBTQ plus youth. And, as you said, that, uh, those provisions were removed. But still, I think that the kind of the aura of the bill, like people are continue to be concerned and it's had that sort of lasting that's stuck with concerns around that bill. And so I'm just curious, and I think like even when it comes to design, there's a fear that I've heard around it. I was neutral on this or maybe supportive of this when we were under the Biden administration. But now that we have, federal leadership that is hateful toward queer people, I don't want to give the government power here. And I'm wondering how you respond to those legitimate fears.
I'm pausing because that what a question. Such a good question, and I have a lot of thoughts on it. And I'm just gonna speak really candidly. And I think our the administration that is in place right now is going to continue to harm LGBTQ plus people, no matter what we do with big tech regulation. And we are in a time where LGBTQ plus people need to be wearing very thick armor daily. Even in our most unguarded moments, we have a shield. And
Mhm.
that is heavy and hard. And I don't want to dismiss that. And I don't want to diminish the fear and the true tragedy that really is. And it's something personally that actively grappling with since the election. And yeah, and I don't want to diminish that. But at the same time, what I want to say is I totally hear the narrative that you don't want to give the government any more power. But when I look at a design bill like KOSA, I don't see it giving the government power. I see it holding the big tech companies accountable for the wrongdoing and the ability for a government, just or unjust, to take action against those companies to make their products safer for kids. The bill can only do what the bill says. And so I'm not a policy analyst. I'll be the first one to tell you, but I have a lot of really good policy analysts on my speed dial, and I call them all the time. Just recently, I'll even be really honest with you, this whole House version of KOSA stuff that just went on was really hard to follow, and I was just like, felt like, truck this way, bottle of water this way, like, it just was like a mess. And and what I really want to be honest about is I picked up the phone and called a really well-respected attorney, Laura Marquez Garrett, and I said, "I need you to talk me down because I'm starting to believe it. I'm
Hmm.
starting to believe the noise. Like,
Right.
walk me down because I'm losing I'm afraid." I was starting to react. I'm afraid of the government too. I'm not invincible. Like, I was like, "Holy crap, what are we doing? Is this the right thing?" And you know what they did? They pulled up the bill and they started showing me and they said, "This is what it says in the bill. This is why they couldn't do this. This would have to go, you have to appeal to the government." Like, we are very lucky to live in the United States of America where there are checks and balances, although I wish there were more, and I think there is some craziness happening. But there is a due process, and to see them walk that through and just be really granular about, like, this is what the bill says. I'm talking about the Senate version of
Yeah.
KOSA, not the House version, to be clear. But and I was like, "Okay, okay, okay." And she was like, "Yeah, you." They were like, excuse me, they were like, you can't don't sensationalize it. This is what the
Hmm.
bill is." And that grounding, like, especially because, 1, I trust them, and 2, because we were looking at the same bill text. Like, there was no discrepancy. I wasn't reading someone else's analysis of it, or I wasn't asking a lobbyist what they think of the bill, or, staff member. And I was just like, "What does the actual text say? Put it in front of my face and let's look at it and let's analyze it." And that was really the information and the sort of armor that I needed to put back on my suit and know that I'm doing the right thing, and I know we're doing the right thing.
Yeah, and I really admire the vulnerability it takes to ask those questions because otherwise, like, this kind of binary we're talking about, i- ironically, of thinking, right, is so easy to fall into. Um, I also don't want to be stuck on either side of that, and it's really important to be able to understand the nuances. Otherwise, the debate gets lost and will go to the highest bidder. And I want to talk about that a little bit. So, because, um, you mentioned the checks and balances that kind of KOSA, and similar legislation enables. And without that, the power is effective and the impunity is effectively in the hands of these trillion-dollar tech companies. And there's it's kind of well documented that Meta spent over $50 million lobbying against KOSA. And some argue that, and I agree, that they are exploiting LGBTQ plus legitimate concerns and fears to protect their profits. We've talked about this a little bit, but I got a really sobering taste of this when I was working at Meta. As many folks with us watching know, I left Meta Horizon Worlds after I was effectively asked to uh, put kids in harm's way for the sake of profits. And this was on a product called Meta Horizon Worlds, which is basically a virtual reality world that you can enter into on your Quest headset, although now it's available on every device. But when I was pitched this idea of Meta Horizon Worlds and leading go to market, the hero story that they told me that got me legitimately excited about the product was think about the isolated gay kid in Kansas. You talked about growing up in Arizona and not having a ton of understanding community around you. And, the story was they're finally going to find community now. But the reality, which I discovered once on the job, was that there was rampant bullying, grooming, harassment, the implication of parental controls where they didn't exist. And, you've written about this a lot. Can you talk us through how you see big tech using the LGBTQ plus community as a shield?
LGBTQ plus people are a I mean, actually, I should not make that general of a statement. I was about to say that LGBTQ plus people are afraid of the government, but that's like not everyone. I'm not going to generalize, but I think that we are, at least I'll say I'm conditioned to be afraid of what's coming out of Washington, D.C. My morning routine is waking up, Googling transgender, hitting the news tab, scrolling, make sure I still have all my rights, and then I close it and I move on with my day. Like, that is something I do every single day. And that is a sobering reality. And that can't be ignored. And so when anything comes out of Washington, D.C., if anything comes out of policy, if we're already on edge. I can't think of the last time. I mean, and this will show my age probably because I know there have been some really there's been incredible progress made in the LGBTQ plus, advocacy world, but I can't think of in my lifetime other than gay marriage being legalized, waking up and being like, yes, like, that was
Mhm,
awesome, like, they wrote me a bill it's exactly how I feel, like, that's just not happening, and so and big tech knows that, and big tech knows that they can sell people who are struggling, who need community, who need connection. "Oh, well, we've got it. We've
mhm,
got it, and we're gonna give it to you with sugar before and sugar after, so it tastes really good, and you're gonna wanna come back for more." You're gonna wanna come
mhm,
back and come back. "Oh, but that experience wasn't as fun that time," but no worries, because you felt something. Like, you're
mhm,
gonna come back, you're gonna come back, and
mhm,
that is what they will bank on. That's what their money is made on. Mark Zuckerberg's passive income is our active scrolling. Like,
mhm,
that is legitimately the business that they have created, is the business of mining our attention, and so why would they wanna do anything that would pull people off of that platform, even if it's just, like, from not excessively using it, like,
mhm,
using it like a normal, product. I have a social media account on We Are 8. It's not super popular in the US yet, but, like,
mhm,
I check that, like, twice a week, I'll I would love to see what's going on there, and it's a conscious choice, and that just
mhm,
isn't happening with these other companies whose incentive model is built around that engagement. And so as long as that's happening, um, LGBTQ plus people are going to continue to sort of be that pawn because they can mobilize an entire base that
mhm,
is has the infrastructure to be loud and to break through noise because we've had to over and over and over again. And it makes me really, I was gonna say sad, but today it just really pisses me off
mhm,
that they will use that advantage to, spark fear and spark some reactions, and then it just explodes because
mhm,
they're prepped and ready. They're prepped and ready, as they should be, to fight against these things, and so it's like they're essentially doing big tech's lobbyist jobs for them.
mhm,
And another thing that, I really think about when you talked about this was, I mean, look at the dichotomy and support for the App Store Accountability Act and KOSA.
mhm,
Like, Tim Cook was, calling, like, the governor of Texas, like, "Stop the App Store Accountability Act," like, "Don't do it," and was, pushing forward KOSA the next day, and Meta's, I think, endorsed the App Store Accountability Act and is that's the way," and it's like Tim Cook up here, Mark Zuckerberg up here, and they're just yelling at each other, and they're just like, "You take responsibility. No, you take responsibility. No," and it's like, grow up, like,
mhm.
grow up, use the money you're sitting on,
Mhm.
and pick yourself up and do the work, and that's not happening. And it's happening at the expense of queer people, and it's really exploiting their energy and their organizing structure that should be being used to fix our in-person communities and stopping violence at an unprecedented scale
Mhm.
against trans women of color. Like, that's what we need to be focused on right now, because and what you said about Horizon Worlds is so freaking insane to me, because it feels like someone just, like, whispered in my ear and was like, "You were right."
Mhm.
I'm like, "Because of your bravery, Kelly, you have given so much, I don't even know what the word is, I
Validation,
don't
maybe.
feel." Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, that's exactly, I feel so validated, and I just have to say thank you, because you being bold enough to share, that's what you thought you were building and then it didn't work. Not everyone in these companies is a villain. Not every technology that
Mhm.
tried to be made for good and turned out bad is the worst thing in the world. No, no, no. It's just like, be bold enough to say, "Oh crap, I did that wrong. Let me try again." If they
Mhm.
have the money to try again, just try again. Like, anything but this. Anything but this.
You're so right, and, in turn, the work that you do and, so many other advocates do has been so validating for me also because I felt like it's at times kind of the only person and the machine works on the inside too. There's a lot of propaganda internally, and you're really made to feel like you are harming people by suggesting that, you know, safeguards are in place. And I love kind of the image you created in my mind talking about Tim. I don't love the image, but it was a helpful image you created in my mind with Tim and Mark. And you're right. Like the priority is not about how to protect kids; it's about how to protect their own company profits. And the images of this sort of billionaire match of 40 chess, right? And where you talked about mobilizing kind of like I think Meta understands the dynamic you also just spoke about the fear and mistrust of government, and is using that fear and mistrust of government to present these arguments that seem like they fit the history. Like it makes a lot of sense at face value. And I think it was just last month that Meta came out and removed 50 accounts related to abortion and reproductive rights, and I think different queer causes. And you wrote about this. You called it a favor to Trump from Zuckerberg, and so I'm wondering, like, how should, like, if there are kind of queer kids or tech workers or anyone impacted by this debate watching and or reading later kind of this conversation, how can people differentiate between genuine concerns and industry propaganda?
Oh, that's the question of the 21st century. I feel like I'm like, how do you trust anything you're looking at these days? Is it real? The other day I was laughing my ass off at this video, and then it was like Sora. And I was like, "Are you kidding me?" And it wasn't even real, and then it ruined it, and I was like, "You know what? I'm done." And I was like, "All right," and I was just mad. But anyways, I digress. But I think that is it. In it, if Meta truly cared about the hero story of the kid in Kansas that needed community online, would they have done what they did? No. If Tim Cook really cared about young queer people and survivors of child sexual abuse material specifically, like, he wouldn't be at a dinner table with someone who's mentioned in the Epstein files. Like,
Mhm.
it's just, if these people cared about kids, their actions would be so different, and that's all I want people to pay attention to. Don't You don't need to read the headline or the partisan news. Like, I get it. It's really, really hard to find news that is not biased. Everything's
Mhm.
biased. It's about learning how to pay attention to what are the facts? What is the I'm Can you tell I have an LSAT prep book? I was just about to talk about, like, reasoning and blah blah blah, but I think it's that's the kind of thing you have to look at. Just look at what people are doing. Like,
Mhm.
if you're overwhelmed and you don't know what the industry propaganda is, just look at all of the things that Mark Zuckerberg does when there's not a headline.
Mhm.
Oh, he's at the White House. Oh, Tim Cook, he's donating $1 million to Trump's, inauguration.
Presenting
And like,
golden statues.
yeah, presenting golden statues in the, like that's the stuff you should pay attention to. My mom and my dad always taught me when I was young, watch what people do. That's how they feel. Watch what
Mhm.
people do, not what they say. People can say a lot of crap, including myself. And I encourage
Mhm.
everyone watching, watch me. Make sure if I'm starting to do something crazy, you should be asking some questions. No one is immune here. And
Right.
so that is really what I would ask of people is just watch. Just
Mhm.
look at what they're doing. Just look at what they do. It's right there for you. It's just laid out
Yeah.
on a platter.
And I think back to something you said earlier about following the money and figuring out
I
like
mean, yeah.
who's benefiting, and we have to kind of examine issues more deeply than the headlines, right? Because that's all part of the propaganda machine. And I want to read our friend Aaron Ping commented, few topics are more personal or easily weaponized to keep people polarized. We see it used over and over again by politicians and powerful companies to manufacture fear, stall reforms, and protect the status quo. And Aaron is a survivor parent who has an amazing podcast of his own that goes really deep into a lot of these dynamics. So I'll be sure to share a link in this recap.
Hi,
And
Erin. Thanks for
hi,
joining.
Aaron. Thanks for joining. And feel free, folks, to put, I have just a few more questions for Lennon, but feel free if you have questions or things you'd like to add to this conversation to include them. Before I have kind of a different line of questioning for you, but I first just want to ask if you mentioned, watching a video, and I know that like literally right now you're recording on your folding phone that you picked up because you've posted about this. You've broken up with your iPhone, and I'm just curious, like what made you realize it was time, and how has it changed kind of the way you see tech regulation or the grip a lot of these companies have on us. I would love to hear a little bit about that.
I think it all is rooted in control issues. If I'm gonna be
Mhm.
a little funny for a second, is like I have a lot of control issues and I can't control all of the insane stuff happening in our world. And so the things I can change are gonna change very quickly. And
Mhm.
one of those things was a year and a little bit ago when I deleted Instagram and was off all social media pretty much for good, hanging up the influencer shoes and, all that. Like, it was because, Mark Zuckerberg, was going buddy buddy with Trump and was reversing all of these protections for queer people and, allowing really horrible things to spread on Instagram and all of the Meta platforms. And that was when I was like, "I'm not working for this guy anymore." Like, I mean,
Mhm.
Kelly, you get it. We're
Mhm.
not working for this guy anymore. Like, I'm not doing it. Like, I am going to delete it, and I'm going to
Mhm.
try something else. And I did, and that's how I found We Are Aid and, came across other people building things like Tribella is another one that I know some incredible advocate and mother, Natalie, is building. And that's what I choose to really focus on. And the iPhone was I had this really sobering moment in New York City in the fall because I had planned with, the incredible team at Heat Initiative. We had a youth-led march to the Fifth Avenue flagship store. And Tim Cook was there opening the doors. It was the launch of their new iPhone. I can never remember the number. There's too many. Who needs that many phones?
Mhm.
But whatever. So, there was lines and fanfare and I was speaking on the mic sharing about my lived experiences with the iPhone and, the fact that it was really a portal to harm and it too had some accountability to take in the harms that I experienced. And when Tim Cook walked out and, just waving his hand and looking out and I felt like we made eye contact, we probably didn't, but I felt like we did, and I had my mic and I was yelling, and I was really
Mhm.
feeling it, and I honestly,
Mhm.
like, left my body, and I came back to my body, and the whole protest ends, and I start walking, and I feel something in my pocket, and I pull it out, I'm like, "It's my freaking iPhone." Like,
Mhm.
How like, for me, and again, I understand there's very few options out there, all the things. I'm not here to make anyone feel guilty, but for me, I was like, I was just that apple with a microphone in my hand screaming at Tim Cook, and then I come and pull out my little iPhone and wanna take a selfie? Like, uh-uh. No, no, no.
Mhm.
Like, I'm done, and that was my, like, aha moment. I wasn't bold enough to completely go away from a smartphone, so I got a Motorola Razr, um, and,
Which is wild that that's a smartphone. I mean, that was many of
I
our
know,
first
I
phones.
know. I
Yeah,
know, now I'm
they've
showing
come a
my
long
age
way.
because yeah, I never had one of the originals, but, like and it folds, and it's really cool, and I'm all my friends see it, and they're like, "What is this?" And it has, like, a camcorder mode, it has a dumb phone, like, mode, like, built into it, and I really love it. Like, I really, really like it. I wish the interface wasn't Google, but other than that, I'm like, "I like this thing." Like, it's set right now at a 90-degree angle like this right now, like
Mhm.
I couldn't have done that with my iPhone. I'm charging my phone and I say all this not because I'm like, I do not get paid by Motorola Razr, but if they wanna pay me, give me a call. But I think what I say all this is like, technology can be fun, it can be
Mhm.
cool, it can be innovative, and it can
Mhm.
also do no harm,
Mhm.
and that's what we have to focus on.
Right. Well, I really appreciate that, and, I also used to work at Apple, and I'm, wearing AirPods right now. I have a complicated relationship with Apple, but I what I like about this conversation is the reminder that it's not like, withdrawing from these harmful systems isn't gonna look the same for everyone,
No,
and there are many different ways to kind of take your own sort of personal stand. And the only group that benefits from us feeling like there's a wrong way or a right way is the tech companies in large part. And Ava, who joined the Heat Initiative activation about Apple's kind of failure to act on child sexual abuse material, she left some really interesting comments as well about, back on the kind of the duality of, the dialectic of the fact that, yeah, these are platforms that offered, especially women and queer people the opportunity to kind of gain direct access to income, monetize their own images, and then still continues to want to sort of own and monetize this emotional and sexual labor. It is, I think, a really interesting and important aspect of this debate. So we've got just about 10 more minutes. Again, if folks have questions, feel free to add them. But I want to ask you a little bit about some of the really meaningful and personal things I've read on your Substack, Diary of a Palatable Trans Woman. You, in your piece, you called, which you titled "The Firearm in My Throat." You wrote powerfully about watching archival footage of Sylvia Rivera when she was. Is she her pronouns?
yes.
Okay. When she was, booed on stage during a 1973 gay liberation rally by the very people she had worked so hard to liberate. You described how once the movement reached the white middle class, it began to sanitize itself and distance itself from the trans women who were too messy, too radical, too inconvenient. You called this watching this, the experience of watching this viscerally familiar. And I've thought a lot about you. I mean, as someone who uh, cares deeply about the work I do being helpful, and it's certainly not harmful to all kids, and especially those on the margins, especially queer kids. Every time I get one of those emails, like I mentioned, I think about what must that be like for you. And so and other and Laura and other advocates in the space who hold that identity. And so can you tell us a little bit about like what your experience is like as an activist walking into spaces where you personally, I have to only assume, take so much fire from other members of your community?
Yeah. I really encourage all of you to n go and find that video of Sylvia Plath. It is, really, really painful to watch, but really also beautiful because it's so honest. And we were not, uh good enough to Sylvia. And so just any chance I get to, give her the flowers that she deserves for
Mm.
laying a path for me to walk is really important to me. And so go watch it. And if you happen to stumble upon it in my Diary of a Palatable Trans Woman, then like fine. But yeah, I it is hard, but I don't want this to be woe is me because I think really what I like to ground myself in is I have a lot of privilege. I have a lot of privilege to be invited into these rooms and to do this work. And so I often ground myself in that, but to be quite honest, when I wrote that, I was so sick of doing that. I was
Mhm.
so mad. I felt like I had hit a wall, where I didn't wanna do it anymore, and that was really, really scary because I don't like that feeling, and it was a feeling of, like, emotional burnout that I hadn't experienced in a long time, and the visceral familiarity of, watching of having to go against, the grain. It's so cliche, but, like,
Mhm.
having to I owe it to the queer people that may be frustrated at first with my perspectives, to keep doing it because I know what's
Mhm.
right, and I know that I have the privilege. I have the I always talk about I have my best friend's name's one of my best friend's names, Ava Smithing, and we always say we're the luckiest girls in the world because we get to hop on Substack Live with Kelly Stonelake, like literally an expert, like, whistleblower. We know Arturo Behar. We know Frances Haugen. We know, I have the incredible leaders at Heat Initiative. I'm surrounded by really incredible resources and information and just love to like honestly be myself and discover it all on my own, and because of that I feel like it's honestly a duty, and just because it's a duty doesn't mean it doesn't hurt
Mhm.
because sometimes when I'm sitting in a room and a great example recently, is like I was sitting in a room and we were talking about a report that Heat Initiative worked on with Parents Together Action, another group in the space with Character AI, and I was in the leadership at Heat are so incredible, and yet I was still nervous to tell them like, hey, like I really think that we skipped over the implications that chatbots have on trans individuals, and of course
Mhm.
they're like, oh my god, I love that. Yeah, we need to talk about that more. Like, that was such an underrepresented part of the report. But the even someone as loud as me and as someone who's, like, done the thing like, I sit in the rooms that I'm so comfortable in, and there's still this, like, level of, like of weight to it, and
Mhm.
that is something I don't wanna gloss over because any queer person in this space, anyone who has a marginalized identity who feels like they, whether the room isn't asking for it or not, it is in our not our nature, it is our habits. A lot of us have unlearned habits to shape ourselves to be more desirable, and I find myself doing it a lot, and that
Mhm.
I have to be honest about, because if I'm not honest about it, I'm not ever gonna figure out, like, who is actually Lennon, and the most true version of myself is going against the grain and doing what I know to be right, and that's advocating for safer online spaces for queer kids and fighting against the the essentially the exploitation of the queer, narrative by big tech.
Mhm. I admire that so much, and I know that's not what you're looking for or the point, but I think that it is critical that those who are safe to tell the truth of, to talk about truths that they have come to know that might not be popular or aligned with the kind of predominant narratives, dominant narratives. I think that that's so important, and it's a completely different context, but I've said many times, in interviews or conversations with people that telling, that it is a total privilege to be able to tell the truth, And I mean that in the sense of, yes, it's a honor and a joy, but also it is a privilege in the sense that those who have privilege are more safe to do so. And I think it's important that people consider kind of what areas that they can carve out to maybe step outside of the kind of flow of traffic that just heads straight into big tech's pockets, what might be true for them, to talk about. And so I just really appreciate the work you're doing and how open you are. I know that, you know, there's folks here on the live with us, like Chris McKenna, you, me, like our personal stories have become part of our advocacy, right? But not everyone has to put that skin in the game. It's a choice, and I really admire that. That's why you're one of my heroes. To close, I am wondering, you wrote about how every time this I have two more questions. Every time this conversation gets, hijacked by big tech narratives, they win and we lose. And I'm wondering, how can LGBTQ plus people and allies and advocates play a role in reclaiming this narrative when nuance can be really challenging, particularly in an environment that is like, you know, scrolling from one piece of content to the next, or conversations where people don't want to talk about what's hard and difficult and complicated. Like, how can those of us who want to advocate for queer kids in this context reclaim this narrative?
I love that, and I have 2 answers. One, I wanna say directly to any LGBTQ plus people that, happen to be struggling with this exact topic. How do what do I think? What do I do? Um, I want to remind you that your safety and your well-being should be the number 1 priority, and if that looks different than the choices that I've made, I respect it, and I want you to make those choices.
Mhm,
Um, we are in a very hard time and we've got to take care of ourselves, and queer people need to um be reminded sometimes that they have the agency to protect themselves a lot of the time. But sometimes they don't, and to those people, I want to say stay strong and stay fighting because unless I disappear into the ether, like I promise you there's at least someone out there working for you.
mhm,
And I hope that one day you'll feel that. To the allies out there, it's keep doing what you're doing by advocating for all kids. And I think the biggest, most tangible thing is be the one that raises your hand and says, "What is this going to do to the queer community? Have we had a queer person in this room? Is anyone in this room feel comfortable to like that's what
mhm,
we need to be doing because a lot of the time, like I have no problem, saying, "Hey, like, I'm worried about this," or, but I can't be in every room, and some days, I feel like, "Oh, like, are they really gonna wanna hear about this right now? Like, it's not
mhm,
really the point." Like, be loud and, like, raise your hand and, like, ask the questions because sometimes we get tired. And
mhm,
so it's like, we just need a bigger army. And so keep doing what you're doing is what I say. Protect all kids online and be the one to ask the question. Don't be afraid to ask the question just because it's not your lived experience.
mhm. I love that. Thank you. And my final question, something it gives me a real kick when I look at my analytics on LinkedIn and the data, the number, as far as the companies, it'll tell you who's following your content. And the number one by large, part, I had, over 1 million impressions on LinkedIn last year, and it is Meta employees and Apple employees. And so I know that they're paying attention to the things I'm saying, even though, and many of them do reach out, but most can't or won't. So I'm wondering, both to lawmakers and big tech employees who hold kid safety in their hands, like, I don't know, both or choose one. Like, what message do you have for them?
I'm an overachiever, so I'll do both, and maybe I'll think of a third on my way through this answer. But I think to lawmakers, it's a little bit less sugar coated and it's just like, get to work, please. Get to freaking work. Get to
Mhm.
work. Get to work. Come on. Like you work for the people. Get to work. And stop taking money from big tech. That's
Mhm.
the if you want to know what you can do as a candidate, do not take money from big tech. It will come back and it will haunt you.
Mhm.
And stop the cycle. Just don't do it. Don't take money from big tech. Just don't do it. And to what was the other one? I already
Big
forgot. It was
tech employees.
oh, th- that's a hard one. But to me, I wouldn't want to. I would want them to know that this isn't about you. It's about the system that you're a part
Mhm.
of, and if you know and are continuing to do harm, that's on you, dog, and you gotta leave.
Mhm.
But if it's your first time hearing about it or, you're trying to make change internally or, you're fighting the good fight, whatever that means for you, then I say thank you and keep doing it and take care of yourself, is really what I have to say about that. So, clean and simple.
Thank you, Lennon, and on that note and taking care of yourself, I don't wanna keep you from your dog for too long.
She's honestly, like, been so good, like, I have not heard her at all, so this is a great the last live I did, she was barking it up a storm, so
She's so
this
supportive of this
yeah,
conversation.
she's for the girls, she's for the girls.
I love it. Well, Lennon, thank you so much. Again, it's such an honor. You are, I mean, without hyperbole, an absolute hero and icon in this space, and I am so grateful for your generosity. And I know that folks who stuck with us, we had a consistent group this whole time. Thank you so
Yeah,
much for staying with us, and excited to. We'll also share this conversation and notes from it as a follow up.
thanks, y'all, thanks.
All right. Thank you. Bye.